Carry on, Mr. Bowditch, chapters 10 through 12. Go over the characters just a little bit. Nat continues to grow and learn and continues to be a lifelong learner. He continues to show great respect for others. And he's starting to learn a little bit about dealing with different relationships. And this is kind of a new aspect. Nat was previously more just interested in book study learning, but now he's learning a different, learning social things. One is with Elizabeth. And he is starting to kind of, think through how to have any type of a relationship with a female, which those are a little bit different. And we find that Elizabeth is specifically comforted by Nat after her father's death. I think this might be a little bit of foreshadowing there. So keep that in mind. Mr. Reed is another foil character that we are introduced to, and he balances out Ben Meeker, who's on my next slide. But basically, Ben continues to be almost like an antagonist, saying, Nat, now you've been an indentured servant and you've been a store bookkeeper, and that's all you're ever going to be. Your lot in life for this 9 years will continue. Whereas Mr. Reed shows just that even though he was a pharmacist by trade, he also was getting a patent for machinery and had many interests. And when he did get to go to Harvard, he was so studious that he got called on to teach and things. So you kind of, the author is using Ben and that man to kind of balance off and give you different roads and approaches and attitudes that Nat can choose from. Okay? Then the author is helping us explore a little bit about work relationships a lot in this chapter in kind of a new way. So you've got Elias Derby, who has always been, he's the big ship guy. And, he's got a presence about him, but he also chooses morals over money. He says, whatever you do, don't put a slave on my ships. And, you have to respect that. Then you see Captain Prince, and, Nat can remember the ring of his laughter, but then when he gets on his ship, he's all serious and, that sort of thing. And exploring that, sometimes people are one thing at home and one thing at work, and feel like that's kind of what duty calls, and letting you kind of think about as well. Okay? So I think the theme that I would really want to bring out is, treat all people with respect is something that we're learning here. Remember Elizabeth saying, even though you're smart, Nat, people aren't chairs that when they get in your way or they don't understand things, you just use them and kick them, They're people with souls that God made. And so whether it's maybe a female that you don't understand or has a little bit different of approach to something than you do because, God made males and females differently, that's to be respected. You don't just, the other one that was explored was subordinates. Okay, so when Nat's on the ship and he has all these hands, I guess you could call them, underneath him, he treated them with respect. And kind of back to Captain Prince, he seemed to think that you keep subordinates in line by treating them with maybe a heavy hand, a real authoritarian hand. And Nat took a different approach that was very successful. He got to know them. He valued that they could learn and started teaching them things. He was patient. And he didn't put on them if they didn't learn right away and say, guess they are just not real bright or whatever. He went, well, I got to keep explaining it until they get it. He knew, God had created them as intelligent people because they are humans. And so he kept at it. And so he is, and I really liked the captain's saying, well, this, I have not had hardly any trouble out of anybody on this ship. And he kind of figured out that it was Nat's approach. Um, so I want you to really think about that as, you will be in charge of people when you are older, how to treat them with respect. And I guess the other thing that I may want to go over is just that second point on that one, that human level thinking is a key to self-respect and giving them opportunities to improve their career. Because we are made in the image of God, and God is a creative God, and God is a thinking God, and a planning God, when somebody has a job that's more of a, I almost want to call it like an animal type job, just a repetitive, think of the factory worker on a assembly line or whatever, they're not going to be satisfied with that job because they were created for so much more. So, you know, learning to think and to find opportunities to use that mind God gave you is a real key to having self-respect and helping somebody else have self-respect. Okay, keep going here. Respect for authority figures. So we talked about respecting people under us. Um, we it's explored basically in that one conversation, freedom of speech, freedom to say what's on our minds, but we need to do it respectfully if it's an authority figure. You can look at some scriptures where, God says, we need to talk about the kings and the presidents and so forth with respect. But at the same time, it's also dangerous to feel like that we can't edify and talk to one another about some bad decisions and things. It just needs to be done respectfully and in a positive light for positive change, not in if we could use Ben Meeker as a example from this book, just nothing's ever going to change, not in a negative bring us down way, but in an edifying way when we talk about things like that. Okay. Okay, some themes. First theme is just life transitions, okay? Finally, Nat is free and he's apprehensive. And I think that's a really good theme to explore because any transition, even a good transition, it's a change, and change for, I think, everybody, but most people, has a scary element. And so we get to explore that with Nat and think about that. Also, freedom. The more freedom you have, the more responsibility. The more freedom you have, the more mess you can make of your life. So when you think of a small child, say a 2-year-old, who, is not even basically allowed out of mommy's sight, well, they're not going to, ruin their entire lives probably because, they don't have the freedom to make big mistakes. Okay, when you get to be 15 or 21 or, you name it, the more freedom you have, the more you're responsible for your own choices and the more that it might be a bad choice. Okay, so and also just there's transitions are times where you just feel kind of lost, and I tend to run from transitions, even if it's a worse situation. I just want stability and embrace those transitions. The Lord uses them, and He is a steady rock during those times. Okay, next thing I wanted to talk about is there was a brief thing about learning the French language, and that was like, do I have to learn how to pronounce it and that sort of thing? And I just want you to be aware that, God made all the different languages. And even at the end times when we're all worshiping, it says people from every tribe and tongue. Those languages aren't going away. He wants to forever be glorified in multiple languages. And we need to have respect for that. I think it's easy to be disrespectful to people or things that we don't understand. And languages is one that I've seen happen a little bit more frequently. So when you see somebody struggling to speak English and it's their second language, you just think, well, what could I say in their language? And if the answer is nothing, then please be respectful that they are trying to communicate in your language. I thought the example in English of rough, cough, and dough. Think how hard that would be. And then when you think of trying to learn their language, yes, it's similarly hard. Okay? The other thing to talk about is human problems, unlike math, have multiple opinions, not always one answer. So, I don't want to steer you away from there is absolute truth, okay? And there's absolute principles, and there's absolute right and wrong. You don't get to choose those things. The things that God said are right, and the things He didn't are wrong, and that sort of thing. But there can be diverse methods to be getting around to those right results and things. You can't, my way is the only way on things. And so, I thought that was well brought out. For our thinking activity, I'm going to go with a quote from the book. It says, if we argue against any branch of liberty, just because sometimes people abuse that liberty, then we argue against liberty itself. Okay? And I want you to take at the bottom of the screen, I've got some examples, think of your own as well, but I want you to take freedom of speech, the newspaper, books, even sermons, and the right to bear arms, that's, to have a gun, and freedom to homeschool. And I want you to think about it in terms of that quote. So all of these freedoms can be abused. That means used in a way that's sinful or wrong or destructive. Okay? I want you to name, how could we use speech in a destructive way? How can we use guns in a destructive way? How can we use homeschooling in a destructive way? Then I want you to say, well, why would taking away these liberties as the answer say, well, you can misuse speech and guns and homeschooling, so we shouldn't have those liberties. Why does that make us less free? Why is that dangerous to have a society like that? Or is it? And then, how can we keep these freedoms while minimizing the abuses? Or can we? So can we politically, using a government authority power, minimize the abuses of these without taking away liberty? Or is that impossible? Or what other ideas? Or who should be in charge of trying to minimize these abuses? I think that'll be a great activity to do with your parents, and I'd love to hear what you guys think of.